Yoon Seo-jin stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her tiny studio apartment. At 19, her delicate features still held traces of childhood innocence, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had grown up too fast. The letter in her trembling hands bore the seal of Jung Corporation, a marriage contract that would change everything. Her grandmother's medical bills had piled up like autumn leaves, each one a reminder of their desperate situation. When the matchmaker approached with an offer from CEO Jung Min-ho, 50 years old and recently widowed, Seo-jin's world tilted on its axis. The dowry would cover all expenses, secure her grandmother's treatment, and provide a future she never imagined. "It's just business," she whispered to herself, the words tasting bitter. Min-ho needed a wife to maintain his corporate image and satisfy his traditional mother's expectations. She needed financial stability. Love wasn't part of the equation. The wedding dress hanging in her closet seemed to mock her with its pristine white silk. Tomorrow, she would walk down an aisle toward a man she'd met only twice, both times in sterile conference rooms with lawyers present. His dark eyes had been unreadable, his handshake brief and professional. Seo-jin touched the small photograph of her parents on the nightstand. They had died when she was 15, leaving her to care for her ailing grandmother alone. "I'm doing this for us," she murmured to their smiling faces. Outside, Seoul's neon lights painted her walls in shifting colors of pink and blue. The city never slept, much like her anxious thoughts. Tomorrow would mark the end of her childhood and the beginning of something she couldn't yet comprehend. The ceremony felt like watching someone else's life unfold. Seo-jin moved through the motions mechanically, her white handbook rustling with each careful step. The Jung family's private chapel was filled with business associates and distant relatives, their faces a blur of polite smiles and curious glances. Min-ho stood at the altar in his tailored suit, tall and imposing. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly styled, his expression composed. When their eyes met, she searched for warmth but found only professional courtesy. He was handsome in the way successful older men often were. Distinguished, confident, untouchable. The traditional vows were spoken in measured tones. When Min-ho lifted her veil, his touch was gentle but distant. The kiss that sealed their union lasted mere seconds, more symbolic than intimate. The photographer captured the moment with bright flashes, preserving their performance for posterity. During the reception, Seo-jin sat beside her new husband like a porcelain doll, smiling when spoken to, nodding at appropriate moments. Min-ho's mother, an elegant woman in her 70s, studied her with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "She's very young," someone whispered behind silk fans. "Pretty enough, I suppose," came another voice. Seo-jin's cheeks burned, but she maintained her composure. This was her reality now, being scrutinized, judged, reduced to her appearance and utility. Min-ho's hand briefly covered hers on the table, whether in comfort or warning she couldn't tell. As evening approached, the gravity of what came next settled in her stomach like a stone. Tonight, she would go home with a stranger who was now her husband. The traditional wedding chamber awaited, decorated with red silk and expectations she wasn't prepared to meet. The Jung family estate sprawled across manicured grounds in Gangnam, its modern architecture a testament to decades of accumulated wealth. Seo-jin's reflection multiplied in the floor-to-ceiling windows as Min-ho led her through rooms that could have housed 20 of her old apartment. The master bedroom was a study in understated luxury, cream walls, dark wood furniture, and abstract paintings that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. The king-sized bed dominated the space, its white linens turned down by invisible staff. "Your things have been moved to the adjoining room," Min-ho said, loosening his tie. His voice was calm, businesslike. "I thought you might prefer your own space initially." Seo-jin's surprise must have shown on her face because he continued, This arrangement benefits us both, but I'm not a monster. You need time to adjust." Relief flooded through her so suddenly she felt dizzy. She had steeled herself for expectations she wasn't ready to meet, for intimacies that felt impossible with this stranger. "The staff will help you with anything you need," he continued, removing his jacket. "Mrs. Park manages the household. She's been with the family for 20 years. Through the connecting door, Seo-jin glimpsed her new room, smaller but still larger than her entire former apartment. Her few belongings looked lost among the expensive furnishings. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked quietly. Min-ho paused in unbuttoning his shirt, his dark eyes meeting hers in the mirror. For a moment, she thought she saw something soften in his expression. "Because kindness costs nothing," he replied, "and perhaps because you remind me of someone I used to know." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't press. Some mysteries were better left unexplored, at least for now. Seo-jin woke to sunlight streaming through silk curtains and the distant sound of gardeners tending the grounds. For a moment, she forgot where she was, reaching for the familiar crack in her old bedroom wall. Instead, her fingers found smooth, expensive wallpaper. The connecting bathroom was marble and chrome, with a shower large enough for 3 people. Hot water flowed endlessly, a luxury she'd rarely experienced. When she emerged, she found fresh clothes laid out on her bed. A simple but elegant dress in soft grey, with shoes that fit perfectly. Downstairs, Mrs. Park waited with the warm efficiency of someone who had managed households for decades. She was a woman in her 60s, with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. "Good morning, Mrs. Jung," she said, the title still strange to Seo-jin's ears. "I've prepared breakfast. The master has already left for the office." The dining room table could seat 20, but a smaller setting had been arranged by the window overlooking the garden. Fresh flowers, bone china, and more food than Seo-jin had seen in months. "This is too much," she protested softly. Mrs. Park's expression gentled. "You're too thin, dear. The master specifically requested nutritious meals to help you gain strength." As Seo-jin ate in silence, she wondered about her husband's first wife. Had she sat in this same chair, eaten from these same plates? The house held no obvious traces of another woman, as if Min-ho had erased all evidence of his previous marriage. "Mrs. Park," she ventured carefully. "What was she like? His first wife?" The older woman's hands stilled on the serving dishes. "That's not for me to say, dear, but I will tell you this. You're here now. That's what matters." 3 days into their marriage, Min-ho's assistant called with a request that felt more like a summons. The CEO needed his wife to appear at Jung Corporation for a company photo shoot, a happy couple for the quarterly report and promotional materials. Seo-jin arrived at the gleaming skyscraper feeling impossibly small. The lobby buzzed with purpose and ambition, everyone dressed in sharp suits and carrying leather briefcases. She wore the navy dress Mrs. Park had selected, her hair styled by a professional who had come to the house that morning. Min-ho's office occupied the entire top floor, with panoramic views of Seoul stretching in all directions. He stood behind his desk in conference with 2 men in expensive suits, his presence commanding even from across the room. "Ah, there's Mrs. Jung," one of the men said with practiced charm. "You're even more beautiful than the photos suggested." Min-ho's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Gentlemen, let's reschedule. My wife and I need to prepare for the photo shoot." When they were alone, he moved to her side with surprising gentleness. "Are you all right? You look pale." "I'm fine," she lied. "Just nervous." He studied her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. This close, she could see gold flecks in his dark eyes, smell his subtle cologne. "The photographer will ask us to look happy together. Can you manage that?" She nodded, though her stomach churned with anxiety. During the shoot, Min-ho's arm around her waist felt warm and solid. When directed to smile at each other, she was surprised to find his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "Better," he murmured, so quietly only she could hear. "We almost looked like we chose this." The call came at dawn. Her grandmother had collapsed again. Seo-jin found herself in Min-ho's Mercedes, speeding through empty morning streets toward the hospital. He had insisted on driving her himself, his hands steady on the wheel while hers shook in her lap. The hospital's harsh fluorescent lights revealed her grandmother's fragile form connected to beeping machines. At 83, Park Soon-ja had been Seo-jin's anchor since her parents' death, the only person who knew her favorite childhood songs and the way she liked her rice. "Halmoni," she whispered, taking the papery hand in hers. Her grandmother's eyes fluttered open, focusing with effort on Seo-jin's face. "My beautiful girl," she croaked. "You look well fed. Happy." Seo-jin couldn't bring herself to mention that happiness was still a distant prospect. Instead, she simply held her grandmother's hand and tried not to cry. Min-ho remained in the hallway, speaking quietly with doctors and nurses. When he returned, his expression was grave, but not hopeless. "The treatment is working," he said simply. "The doctors are optimistic about her recovery." Seo-jin's eyes filled with tears, gratitude, relief, and something she couldn't quite name. This man had given her grandmother life when Seo-jin couldn't. "Thank you," she whispered. He sat beside her in the uncomfortable hospital chair, his presence solid and reassuring. "Family is important," he said quietly, "even when it's chosen rather than born." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning she wasn't ready to examine. For now, it was enough that her grandmother would live and that she wasn't facing this crisis alone. 2 weeks into their marriage, Seo-jin discovered Min-ho's weakness, insomnia. She heard him moving through the house at 3 in the morning, his footsteps echoing in the marble hallways. From her bedroom window, she could see him in his study, bent over paperwork under the glow of a desk lamp. The next evening, she gathered her courage and knocked on his study door. He looked up from his computer, surprise flickering across his features. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. She shook her head. "I made tea. Green tea with honey, my grandmother's recipe for restless nights." He accepted the cup with something that might have been gratitude. "You don't have to take care of me," he said softly. "Maybe I want to." The admission surprised them both. Min-ho's eyes searched her face as if looking for deception or hidden motives. Finding none, he gestured to the chair across from his desk. "My first wife used to say I worked too much," he said after a long silence. She wasn't wrong. It was the first time he'd mentioned his deceased wife directly. Seo-jin waited, sensing more words coming. "Cancer," he continued, his voice carefully neutral. 2 years from diagnosis to... She was 35, brilliant, kind, everything I didn't deserve. "I'm sorry," Seo-jin said, meaning it. "She would have liked you," he said unexpectedly. "You have her gentleness, her strength." The comparison should have felt heavy, but instead it felt like an honor. They sat in comfortable silence as Seoul glittered beyond the windows, 2 people slowly learning to exist in the same space. Jung Min-ho's mother arrived for Sunday dinner with the precision of a military operation. Mrs. Jung Kyung-ja swept into the mansion wearing Chanel and disapproval in equal measure, her sharp eyes cataloguing every detail of Seo-jin's appearance and behavior. "You've gained weight," she observed, as if commenting on the weather. "Good. Min-ho prefers substantial women." Seo-jin's cheeks burned, but she maintained her composure. Beside her, Min-ho's jaw tightened, though he said nothing. The family dynamics were clearly established. His mother ruled through criticism and passive aggression, and he had learned to endure rather than confront. Dinner was an exercise in social warfare, disguised as polite conversation. Every topic became a minefield. Seo-jin's education, insufficient. Her family background, tragic but common. Her ability to produce heirs, unproven and pressing. "The Jung line must continue," the older woman declared over dessert. "I trust you understand your primary responsibility." The words hung in the air like smoke. Min-ho's hand found Seo-jin's under the table, his fingers warm and steady. "Mother," he said quietly, his voice carrying a warning. "That's enough." "I'm simply stating facts," she replied, but her tone shifted slightly. Even she recognized her son's limits. Later, after his mother's departure, Min-ho found Seo-jin in the garden. She sat on a stone bench among the roses, her shoulders curved inward. "She means well," he said, settling beside her. "Does she?" He was quiet for a long moment. "No," he admitted. "She means to maintain control. It's how she survived my father's neglect and built this empire alongside him." "And how do I survive her?" His hand covered hers, warm and surprisingly comforting. "By being yourself. She respects strength even when she pretends otherwise." The flu struck Seo-jin with sudden ferocity, fever, chills and a weakness that left her bedridden for days. Mrs. Park hovered with concern, bringing endless cups of ginger tea and traditional remedies. Min-ho's reaction surprised everyone, including himself. He cancelled meetings, worked from home, and personally carried meals to her room. When her fever spiked dangerously high, he called his personal physician and sat beside her bed through the night, monitoring her temperature with the dedication of a worried husband. "You don't have to stay," she whispered through cracked lips. "Where else would I be?" His words were simple, but they carried weight. This wasn't obligation or image management, it was care, raw and unvarnished. By the third day, her fever broke. She woke to find Min-ho asleep in the chair beside her bed, his usually perfect appearance rumpled and vulnerable. Stubble shadowed his jaw, and his shirt was wrinkled from sleeping upright. He looked human in a way she'd never seen before. When he stirred and found her watching him, something shifted between them. The careful distance they'd maintained began to crack. "You stayed," she said softly. "Did you think I wouldn't?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications. She had thought exactly that their arrangement was too new, too transactional for genuine concern. But here was evidence to the contrary. "Thank you," she whispered. He leaned forward, his hand brushing hair from her forehead with surprising gentleness. "You're my wife," he said simply. "In sickness and in health, remember?" The wedding vows had felt empty at the time, but now they carried unexpected meaning. Perhaps their marriage was becoming something more than a business arrangement. Min-ho surprised her with an invitation to accompany him to a gallery opening, their first public appearance as a couple beyond corporate functions. Seo-jin wore a black dress that Mrs. Park had selected, elegant but understated, appropriate for a CEO's young wife. The gallery buzzed with Seoul's cultural elite, artists, collectors and socialites who spoke in hushed tones about technique and meaning. Seo-jin felt like an imposter among people who seemed to breathe sophistication. "You're nervous," Min-ho observed, offering her a glass of wine. "I don't belong here," she admitted. His expression softened. "Neither did I once. My father was a factory worker who built an empire through determination and luck. These people accepted him because he had money, not breeding." They moved through the exhibition together, and Seo-jin was surprised by Min-ho's knowledge of art. He spoke thoughtfully about composition and color, his usual business mask replaced by genuine appreciation. "Do you paint?" she asked. "I used to. Before." He gestured vaguely at his suit, his position, the weight of responsibility. "My first wife encouraged it. After she died, I stopped." They paused before a landscape painting, mountains shrouded in mist, painted in soft blues and grays. It was beautiful and melancholy, like a visual representation of grief. "She would have loved this," he said quietly. Instead of jealousy, Seo-jin felt understanding. His love for his first wife wasn't a threat to their growing connection. It was proof that he was capable of deep feeling. "Maybe you should start painting again," she suggested gently. He looked at her with surprise, as if the possibility hadn't occurred to him. "Maybe I will." Their eyes met, and for a moment, the gallery faded away. They were just two people learning to see each other clearly. The typhoon hit Seoul with unexpected fury, turning the city into a maze of flooded streets and fallen trees. Min-ho was stranded at the office, leaving Seo-jin alone in the mansion with Mrs. Park and a handful of staff. Power flickered and died as wind howled through the gardens. In the candle-lit darkness, the house felt different, smaller, more intimate. Mrs. Park organized emergency supplies with calm efficiency, while Seo-jin helped wherever she could. "You're good in a crisis," the older woman observed as they moved furniture away from potentially leaking windows. "I've had practice," Seo-jin replied, thinking of hospital vigils and unpaid bills. Around midnight, the front door burst open. Min-ho stood in the entrance, soaked and disheveled, his expensive suit ruined by rain and wind. "The roads are impassable," he explained, water dripping onto marble floors. "I walked the last 2 kilometers. Seo-jin stared at him in disbelief. He had abandoned his car and walked through a typhoon to get home. To her, "You could have stayed at the office," she said when they were alone, toweling his hair dry. "I could have," he agreed. "But my wife was here." The word wife sounded different now, weighted with meaning that went beyond legal contracts. They sat together in the candle-lit living room, sharing whispered conversations while the storm raged outside. "I was worried about you," she admitted. His hand found hers in the flickering light. "I know," he said simply. "That's why I came home." The admission hung between them, acknowledgement that home was no longer just a place, but wherever they were together. The storm outside began to feel less important than the quiet revolution happening in their hearts. Seo-jin's 20th birthday arrived with spring flowers and unexpected celebration. She had mentioned the date in passing, never expecting Min-ho to remember or care. But she woke to find her room filled with white roses and a breakfast tray bearing her favorite foods. The day unfolded like a fairy tale. Min-ho had cleared his schedule, something his assistant assured her was unprecedented. They drove to a quiet restaurant in the mountains, away from Seoul's crowds and curious eyes. 20, he mused over lunch. "I feel ancient by comparison." "You're not that old," she said, then blushed at her boldness. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Careful, Mrs. Young." That almost sounded like a compliment. The teasing felt natural, comfortable. They were becoming friends, she realized. Somewhere between his midnight work sessions and her gentle care during his insomnia, between her illness and his worry, they had begun to genuinely like each other. The gift he presented after dinner was a small velvet box. Inside lay a delicate necklace, not the expensive jewelry she'd expected, but something personal and thoughtful. A small pendant shaped like a crane, the Korean symbol of longevity and peace. "For good fortune," he said softly, fastening it around her neck. His fingers brushed her skin, sending unexpected shivers down her spine. "It's beautiful," she whispered, touching the pendant. "Happy birthday, Seo-jin." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it sounded like music. The distance between them seemed to shrink with each passing moment, and she wondered if he felt it too, this subtle shift from arrangement to something deeper. The turning point came on a quiet evening in late spring. They sat in Min-ho's study, sharing tea and comfortable silence, as had become their habit. Outside, cherry blossoms drifted past the windows like snow. "I need to tell you something," Min-ho said suddenly, setting down his cup with unusual precision. Seo-jin's heart stuttered. In 3 months of marriage, she had learned his moods, and this careful composure meant serious conversation. "The marriage contract," he continued, his eyes fixed on his hands. "There's a clause you weren't told about." Fear crept up her spine. "What kind of clause?" "After 1 year you can request an annulment, with full financial settlement, enough for your grandmother's care and your own independence." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I wanted you to have an escape route." The words hit her like cold water. All this time, he had planned for her to leave. The kindness, the care, the growing closeness. It had an expiration date. "Why are you telling me now?" she asked quietly. "Because I need you to know that whatever happens between us, it's your choice, you're not trapped." He paused, vulnerability flickering across his features. "And because I hope you'll choose to stay." The confession hung in the air between them. Seo-jin felt her world realigning, pieces clicking into place. His gentle treatment, his respect for her boundaries, his concern for her comfort. It had all been real. "You could have forced this marriage to be whatever you wanted," she said softly. "I wanted it to be something you could choose to love." The word love shimmered between them like a bridge neither had dared to cross. Seo-jin felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition. What had begun as necessity was becoming something precious. "I don't want an escape route," she whispered. His relief was palpable, transforming his entire posture. "Neither do I." 6 months later, Seo-jin stood in the same mirror where her journey had begun, but everything had changed. The woman looking back at her was confident, loved, and genuinely happy. Her reflection showed someone who belonged in this life, not because she had to, but because she chose to. Min-ho appeared behind her, his hands settling gently on her shoulders. They had renewed their vows the week before, not the business arrangement of their first wedding, but a celebration of the love they had discovered together. "Ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, touching the crane pendant that had become her talisman. Today, they were hosting her grandmother's 80th birthday party, a celebration that would have been impossible without Min-ho's intervention in their lives. The party was small but perfect. Her grandmother, healthy and glowing, sat surrounded by friends and the family she had gained through Seo-jin's marriage. Mrs. Park bustled about with maternal pride, and even Min-ho's mother managed grudging approval of the arranged festivities. "You did this," her grandmother whispered, squeezing Seo-jin's hand. "You saved us both." "We saved each other," Seo-jin replied, her eyes finding Min-ho across the room. He was speaking with the doctor who had cared for her grandmother, but his gaze kept returning to her with an expression of such tenderness that it still took her breath away. When their eyes met, he smiled, the private smile reserved only for her. Later, after the guests had gone and the house had settled into quiet, they walked through their garden together. The roses Min-ho had planted in honor of their first spring together were blooming magnificently. "No regrets?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Only one," she said, leaning into his warmth. His eyebrows rose in question. "I wish we could go back and tell our younger selves that everything would be okay, that love was possible, even when it seemed impossible." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair and happiness. "Maybe they already knew," he suggested. "Maybe that's why we found our way to each other." Under the stars of a Seoul night sky, surrounded by the garden they had planted together, Seo-jin knew he was right. Their love story hadn't begun with passion or romance. It had grown from kindness, watered with patience, and bloomed into something more beautiful than either had dared to dream. The 19-year-old girl who had walked into an arranged marriage had become a woman who had chosen love. And the 50-year-old man who had built walls around his heart had learned to tear them down for the right person. Their beginning had been an arrangement. Their ever after was a choice they made every single day.